I won't be stopping. I'm going to read Dr. Jung's talk called The Symbolic Life, which he gave on April the 5th, 1939, to the Guild of Pastoral Psychology, London. It was issued privately from shorthand notes by Derek Kitchen as Guild Lecture number 80. It was issued in London, 1954, so 15 years later after the war. And it is buried in the collected works of C.G. Jung in the book called The Symbolic Life. And it's volume 18. Whoops. Okay, well, sorry, you don't need to see that. It's volume 18, where the curators of the collected works of C.G. Jung saw fit to bury it because the Jungian analyst group in the world did not want to challenge the church, and obviously it was a very difficult time. 5th of April 1939 was 5 months before the commencement of World War II in Europe, so things were getting hot and heavy. And Dr. Jung was in London giving this talk, and therefore we have it. Thank God. But in any case, in my 34-year search for the truth, the spiritual truth, I have finally found it, and it's in this essay, thanks to Jason E. Smith. I'll leave the total description on the other video, which I made a few minutes ago, but then it got truncated. So now I'll read the entire thing. And so this is in 2 parts. The first part I'm going to read this morning, and the second part, which is the Q&A after this, is another 10 pages, which I'll read on another occasion. Maybe tomorrow or Sunday. But for now, this is the essay. Professor Jung, and before his talk begins, there's 3 paragraphs in italics, so that explain the context. Professor Jung was asked 2 questions. First, had he any views on what was likely to be the next step in religious development? Did he, for example, think that there would be a new revelation, as some would phrase it, a new incarnation of the world teacher, a new collective fantasy? Or was there likely to be a reinterpretation and new appreciation of the esoteric meaning of Christianity, perhaps with the aid of psychology? Or would there be no collective expression, but a period in which each man had to make his own individual contact and live out his own personal expression? Secondly, would he explain why the believing Catholic was not subject to neurosis, and what could be done by the Protestant churches to counteract the tendency of their members to neurotic conditions? And so here is Dr. Jung's talk, beginning with paragraph 608 of volume 18 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. I am not as ambitious as the questions that have been put to me. I should like to start with the second question about the Roman Catholics, which has not been considered as of primary importance, but which, from a technical point of view, deserves full attention. Paragraph 609. You have heard that I said Roman Catholics are less threatened by neurosis than members of other religious confessions. Of course, there are Catholic neurotics just as well as others, but it is a fact that in my 40 years of experience, I have had no more than 6 practicing Catholics among my patients. Naturally, I do not count all those who have been Catholics or who say that they are Catholics but who do not practice. But of practicing Catholics, I have had not more than 6, about 6. That is also the experience of my colleagues. In Zurich, we are surrounded by Catholic cantons. Not quite 2/3 of Switzerland is Protestant, and the rest is Catholic. And then we have on the frontier, southern Germany, which is Catholic. So we should have a fair number of Catholic patients, but we have not. We have very few. We'll see the focus on, I guess it's all right. This is what I was fussing with earlier. The focus doesn't seem to be very good, but anyway. Paragraph 610. I was once asked by students of divinity a very interesting question: whether, in my view, people in modern times, in case of psychological trouble, would go to the doctor rather than the parson or the priest. Now, I said I could not answer that question, but I would inquire. So I sent round a questionnaire with detailed questions. I did not do it myself because if I ask something, of course, that is already a prejudice and every answer would be prejudice. So I gave the questionnaire to certain people who were not known to be acquainted with me or in any kind of relation to me. And they sent it around, and we got hundreds of very interesting answers. And there I found the confirmation of what I already knew, namely, a large percentage, by far the majority, of Catholics said that in case of psychological trouble, they would go to the priest and not to the doctor. The vast majority of Protestants said they would naturally go to the doctor. I had a very large number of answers from members of families of parsons, and they nearly all said that they would not go to the parson. They would rather go to the doctor. I can talk quite freely about this. I am the son of a parson, and my grandfather was a sort of bishop and had 5 uncles, all parsons. So I know something about the job. I had no hostile attitude to the clergy. I have no hostile attitude to the clergy. On the contrary, but this is a fact. I also had answers from Jews, and not one single Jew said he would go to the rabbi. He wouldn't even think of it. And I had one Chinese who gave me a classical answer. He said, quote, "When I am young, I go to the doctor, and when I am old, I go to the philosopher," unquote. Paragraph 611. I also had answers from representatives of the clergy, and I must mention one answer, which I hope is not in any way representative, but which casts a certain light upon a certain kind of theologian. The writer said, quote, "Theology has nothing to do with the practical man," unquote. What has it to do with then? You could say, with God? But you are not going to tell me that theology deals with God in that sense. Theology is really meant for man. If it is meant for anything, God needs no theology, I should say. The answer is a symptom of a certain attitude, which explains a lot. Paragraph 612. Now, I have spoken of my own experience in this field, but recently statistical researches have been made in America about the same question, but from another angle. It is a sort of appreciation of the amount of complexes or complex manifestations you find in people. You find the least or the smallest number of complex manifestations in practicing Catholics, far more in Protestants, and the most in Jews. I'm just trying to improve the focus here for a moment. Maybe my camera will refocus. Okay, we'll go with what we've got. Paragraph 612. Now, I have spoken of my experience in this field. Okay, that's what I had read. All right, I'll reread that from the beginning. Paragraph 612. Now I have spoken of my own experience in this field, but recently statistical researches have been made in America about the very same question, but from another angle. It is a sort of appreciation of the amount of complexes or complex manifestations you find in people. You find the least or the smallest number of complex manifestations in practicing Catholics, far more in Protestants, and the most in Jews. That is absolutely independent of my own researches. A colleague of mine in the United States made these researches, and that bears out what I have told you. Paragraph 613. So there must be something in the Catholic Church which accounts for this peculiar fact. Of course, we think in the first place of confession. That is only the outer aspect. I happen to know a great deal about confession because I have often had to do with the Catholic clergy, particularly with Jesuits, who were busy in psychotherapy. For many years, the Catholic clergy had studied psychotherapy. They have followed it up very closely. In the first place, it was, of course, the Jesuits who studied it, and now recently I've heard that the Benedictines have done so too. There is an old tradition in the Catholic Church of the directeur de conscience, director of conscience, I think is the translation of that, a sort of leader of souls whose directors have an extraordinary amount of experience and training in that work. And I have often been amazed at the wisdom with which Jesuits and other Catholic priests advise their patients. Good thing Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Okay. Paragraph 614. Just recently it happened with a patient of mine, a woman of the nobility who had a Jesuit father confessor, discussed with him all critical points of the analysis she made under my care. Of course, a number of things were not quite orthodox, and I was fully aware that there was a great conflict in her mind, and I advised her to discuss these matters with her father confessor. He was a famous Jesuit. He is now dead. And then, after she had had that very frank talk, she told me all he said to her, and he had confirmed every word I had told her, a thing that was rather amazing to me, particularly from the mouth of a Jesuit. That opened my eyes to the extraordinary wisdom and culture of the Catholic directeur de conscience. And it explains to a certain extent why the practicing Catholic would rather go to the priest. Paragraph 615. The fact is that there are relatively few neurotic Catholics, and yet they are living under the same conditions as we do. They're presumably suffering from the same social conditions and so on. And so one would expect a similar amount of neurosis. There must be something in the cult, in the actual religious practice, which explains that peculiar fact that there are fewer complexes, or that these complexes manifest themselves much less in Catholics than in other people. That something besides confession is really the cult itself. It is the Mass, for instance. The heart of the Mass contains a living mystery. That is the thing that works. When I say a living mystery, I mean nothing mysterious. I mean mystery in that sense, which the word has always had, a mysterium tremendum, a tremendous mystery. And the Mass is by no means the only mystery in the Catholic Church. There are other mysteries too. They begin with the very preparations, the simple things in the church. Take, for instance, the preparation of the baptismal water, the rite of the Benedictio Fontis Major or Minor in the night of the Sabbath before Easter. There you can see that a part of the illusion mysteries is still performed. Okay, now just say as a sidelight that the reason I point you back to the talk by Jorge Ferrer, which we had on Wednesday, is because he was talking about the mystery too. And from about 10 minutes into the talk, he defines the mystery and he defines participation in the mystery. So I hope you'll go back and listen to his talk. It's a very powerful talk. So 616, paragraph 16. If you ask the average priest, he is unable to give you any account of these things. He does not know them. I once asked the Bishop of Freiburg in Switzerland to send us a man who could give a good account of the mystery of the Mass. It was a sad failure. He could tell us nothing. He could only confess to the wonderful impression, the marvelous mystical feeling, but he could say nothing at all as to why he had that feeling. It was only sentiments, and we could do nothing with it. But if you go into the history of the rite, if you try to understand the whole structure of that rite, including all of the other rites around it, then you see it is a mystery that reaches down into the history of the human mind. It goes back very far, far beyond the beginnings of Christianity. You know that very important parts of the Mass, for example, the host, belong to the cult of Mithras. In the cult of Mithras, they use bread stamped with the cross or divided into four. They use little bells, and they use baptismal water that is quite certainly pre-Christian. We even have texts that bear this out. The rite of the divine water, or the aqua permanens, or the eternal water, is an alchemical conception, older than its Christian use. And when you study the Benedictio Fontis, the actual making of the water, you see that it is an alchemical procedure. And we have a text from the 1st century, a text of Pseudo-Democritus, which says what the blessing was done for. Paragraph 617. These are absolute facts, which are surely established, quite surely established. They point back into prehistory, into a continuity of tradition, perhaps hundreds of years before Christianity. Now, these mysteries have always been the expression of a fundamental psychological condition. Man expresses his most fundamental and most important psychological conditions in this ritual, this magic, or whatever you call it. And the ritual is the cult performance of these basic psychological facts. That explains why we should not change anything in a ritual. The ritual must be done according to tradition. And if you change one little point in it, you make a mistake. You must not allow your reason to play with it. For instance, take that most difficult dogma, the dogma of the virgin birth. It is absolutely wrong to rationalize it. If you leave it as it is, as it has been handed down, then it is true. But if you rationalize it, it is all wrong, because then you shift it over to the plane of our playful intellect, which does not understand the secret. It is the secret of virginity and the virginal conception, and that is a most important psychological fact. The sad truth is that we do not understand it anymore. But in former centuries, man did not need that kind of intellectual understanding. We are very proud of it, but it is nothing to be proud of. Our intellect is absolutely incapable of understanding these things. We are not far enough advanced psychologically to understand the truth, the extraordinary truth of ritual and dogma. Therefore, such dogma should never be submitted to any kind of criticism. Okay, just as a sidelight, I would say this is the essence of my comments about logos and eros over the years. and fundamentally, where I separate from Jordan Peterson, because once you use the logos against a religious doctrine, it destroys the doctrine. Okay. I'm just reading this essay, so I won't be commenting on your comments until the end. Paragraph 618. So you see, if I treat a real Christian, a real Catholic, I always keep him down to the dogma and say, you stick to it. And if you begin to criticize it in any way intellectually, then I am going to analyze you, and then you are in the frying pan, unquote. When a practicing Catholic comes to me, I say, did you confess this to your father confessor? Naturally, he says, no, he doesn't understand. What in hell, then, I say, did you confess? Oh, lousy little things of no importance, but the main sins he never talked of. As I said, I have had quite a number of these Catholics, 6. I was quite proud to have so many, and I said to them, now you see, what you tell me here, this is really serious. You go now to your father confessor, and you confess whether he understands it or does not understand it. That is of no concern. It must be told before God, and if you don't do it, you are out of the church, and then analysis begins, and then things will get hot. So you are much better off in the lap of the church. So you see, I brought these people back into the church with the result that the Pope himself gave me a private blessing for having taught certain important Catholics the right way of confessing. Paragraph 619. For instance, there was a lady who played a great role in the war. She was very Catholic, and always in the summer, she used to come to Switzerland to pass her summer holiday. The war he's talking about is World War I at this point. There's a famous monastery there with many monks, and she used to go to it for confession and spiritual advice. Now, being an interesting person, she got a bit too interested in her father confessor, and he got a bit too interested in her, and there was some conflict. He was then removed from the clausura, and she naturally collapsed, and she was advised to go to me. So she came to me in full resistance against the authorities who had interfered, and I made her go back to her spiritual authorities and confess the whole situation. And when she went back to Rome, where she lived and where she had a confessor, he asked her, quote, well, I know from many years ago, how is it that you now confess so freely, unquote. And the lady said she had learned it from a doctor. That is the story of how I got the Pope's private blessing. Paragraph 626. My attitude to these matters is that as long as a patient is really a member of a church, he ought to be serious. He ought to be really and sincerely a member of that church, and he should not go to the doctor to get his conflicts settled when he believes he could do it with God. For instance, when a member of the Oxford group comes to me in order to get treatment, I say, quote, "You are in the Oxford group. So long as you are there, you settle your affair with the Oxford group. I can't do it better than Jesus." Unquote. Paragraph 621, and this is where his activity with Alcoholics Anonymous comes up. Not at this time, he did not know that he had been the instigation for Alcoholics Anonymous, but here's what he was thinking. 621. I will tell you a story of such a case. A hysterical alcoholic was cured by this group movement, and they used him as a sort of model and sent him all around Europe, where he confessed so nicely and said that he had done wrong and how he had got cured through the group movement. And when he had repeated his story 20 or maybe it may have been 50 times, he got sick of it and took to drink again. The spiritual sensation had simply faded away. Now, what are they going to do with him? They say now he is pathological, he must go to the doctor. See, in the first stage, he has been cured by Jesus. In the second stage, by a doctor. I should and did refuse such a case. I sent that man back to these people and said, if you believe that Jesus has cured this man, he will do it a second time. And if he can't do it, you don't suppose that I can do it better than Jesus, unquote. But that is just exactly what they do expect. When a man is pathological, Jesus won't help him, but the doctor will. Paragraph 622. As long as a fellow believes in the Oxford group movement, he stays there. And as long as a man is in the Catholic Church, he is in the Catholic Church for better or worse, and he should be cured by those means. And mind you, I have seen that they can be cured by those means. That is a fact. Absolution, the Holy Communion, can cure them, even the very serious cases. If the experience of the Holy Communion is real, if the ritual and the dogma are fully expressed, the psychological situation of that individual, he can be cured. If the ritual and dogma do not fully express the psychological situation of that individual, he can't be cured. That is the reason why you have Protestantism, and that is why Protestantism is so uncertain, why it splits and splits. That is no objection to Protestantism. It is exactly the same as the story about the Code Napoleon. Paragraph 623. After the Code Napoleon had been in use a year, a man entrusted with the execution of Napoleon's orders came back with a portfolio of immense size. Napoleon looked at it and asked, "Mais comment? Est-ce que le code est mort?" But tell me, is the code dead? Because the man had so many propositions to make. Commentary, I suppose. But the man answered, au contraire, sire, il vit, it lives. Paragraph 624. The splitting up of Protestantism into new denominations, 400 or more we have, is a sign of life. But alas, it is not a very nice sign of life in the sense of a church, because there is no dogma and there is no ritual. There is not the typical symbolic life. Sorry. Paragraph 625. I have 7 more pages to read. Paragraph 625. You see, man is in need of a symbolic life, badly in need. If we only live banal, ordinary, rational, or irrational things, which are naturally also within the scope of rationalism, otherwise you could not call them irrational. But we have no symbolic life. Where do we live symbolically? Nowhere except where we participate in the ritual of life. But who among the many are really participating in the ritual life? Very few. And when you look at the ritual life of the Protestant church, it is almost nil. Even the Holy Communion has been rationalized. I say that from the Swiss point of view. In the Swiss Zwinglian church, the Holy Communion is not a communion at all. It is a meal of memory. There is no Mass either. There is no confession. There is no ritual, symbolic life. Paragraph 626. Have you got a corner somewhere in your house where you perform the rites, as you can see in India? Even the very simple houses there have at least a curtained corner where the members of the household can lead the symbolic life, where they can make their new vows or meditation. We don't have it. We have no such corner. We have our own room, of course, but there is a telephone which can ring us up at any time, and we always must be ready. We have no time, no place. Where have we got these dogmatic or these mysterious images? Nowhere. We have art galleries, yes, where we kill the gods by the thousands. We have robbed the churches of their mysterious images, of their magical images, and put them into art galleries. That is worse than killing the 300 children in Bethlehem. It is a blasphemy. Okay, now this is where I get into talking about my ritual as underlining books, which is the same thing that Dr. Jung did. By underlining the books, you're causing yourself to read carefully and identify where the important ideas are in a paragraph, and that takes you imaginally into another place, not sitting at your dining room table or sitting at your desk, but it takes you into the imaginal place that the author is speaking of. And okay, so this next chapter is about my red ball, where I talk about this is chaos. You need some method to take yourself out of the chaos. And this is what he says, paragraph 627. Now, we have no symbolic life, and we are all badly in need of the symbolic life. Only the symbolic life can express the need of the soul, the daily need of the soul, mind you. And because you have no such thing, you could never step out of this mill, this awful, grinding, banal life in which they are nothing but. In the ritual, they are near the Godhead. They are even divine. Think of the priest in the Catholic Church who is in the Godhead. He carries himself to the sacrifice on the altar. He offers himself as the sacrifice. Do we do it? Where do we know that we do it? Nowhere. Everywhere is banal. Everything is nothing but. And that is the reason why people are neurotic. They are simply sick of the whole thing, sick of that banal life, and therefore they want sensation. They even want a war. They all want a war. They are all glad that when there is a war, they say, thank heavens, now something is going to happen, something bigger than ourselves. Paragraph 628. These things go pretty deep, and no wonder people get neurotic. Life is too rational. There is no symbolic existence in which I am something else, in which I am fulfilling my role as one of the actors in the divine drama of life. And this is precisely my point when I talk about logos and eros, where we have all this logos around us, including in books, but we've cut ourselves off from life itself, because life doesn't exist in the logos. It exists in the eros, along with the chaos. Paragraph 629. I once had a talk with the master of ceremonies of a tribe of Pueblo Indians, and he told me something very interesting. He said, quote, "Yes, we are a small tribe, and these Americans, they want to interfere with our religion. They should not do it," he said, "because we are the sons of the Father," the Son, S-U-N, Son. We are the sons of the Father, the Son. He who goes there, pointing to the Son, that is our Father. We must help him daily to rise over the horizon and to walk over heaven. And we don't do it for ourselves only. We do it for America. We do it for the whole world. And if these Americans interfere with our religion through their missions, they will see something. In 10 years, Father, Son won't rise anymore because we can't help him anymore. Paragraph 630. Now, you may say that that is just a sort of mild madness. Not at all. These people have no problems. They have their daily life, their symbolic life. They get up in the morning with a feeling of their great and divine responsibility. They are the sons of the Son, the Father, and their daily duty is to help the Father over the horizon, not for themselves alone, but for the whole world. You should see these fellows. They have a natural, fulfilled dignity. And I quite understand when he said to me, "Now look at these Americans. They are always seeking something. They are always full of unrest, always looking for something." What are they looking for? There is nothing to be looked for. That is perfectly true. You can see them. These traveling tourists always go looking for something, always in the vain hope of finding something. On my many travels, I have found people who were on their third trip round the world uninterruptedly, just traveling, seeking. I met a woman in Central Africa who had come up alone in a car from Cape Town and wanted to go to Cairo. "What for?" I asked. "What are you trying to do that for?" And I was amazed when I looked into her eyes, the eyes of a hunted, cornered animal, seeking, always in the hope of something. I said, "What in the world are you seeking? What are you waiting for? What are you hunting after?" She is nearly possessed. She is possessed by so many devils that chase her around. And why is she possessed? Because she does not live the life that makes sense. Hers is a life utterly, grotesquely banal, utterly poor, meaningless, with no point in it at all. If she is killed today, nothing has happened, nothing has vanished, because she was nothing. But if she could say, "I am the daughter of the moon. Every night I must help the moon, my mother, over the horizon," that is something else. Then she lives, then her life makes sense, and makes sense in all continuity and for the whole of humanity. That gives peace when people feel that they are living the symbolic life, that they are actors in the divine drama. That gives the only meaning to human life. Everything else is banal, and you can dismiss it. A career producing of children are all Maya compared with that one thing that your life is meaningful. Paragraph 631. That is the secret of the Catholic Church, that they still, to a certain extent, can live the meaningful life. For instance, if you can watch daily the sacrifice of the Lord, if you can partake of his substance, then you are filled with the deity, and you daily repeat the eternal sacrifice of Christ. Of course, what I say is just in so many words, but to the man who really lives it, it means the whole world. It means more than the whole world because it makes sense to him. It expresses the desire of the soul. It expresses the actual facts of his unconscious life. When the wise man said, nature demands death, he meant just that. And I just observed that this is why Jordan Peterson can't take the step across to saying anything like he believes in God, because he can't believe the rational logic of it, and he hasn't understood what Dr. Jung is talking about, as I've said many times. And so he's found a bunch of nice memes of quotes of Jung's, but he hasn't understood his basic premise. Which are the basic premise is carried in the first 2 paragraphs of the Red Book. Easy place to look. Doesn't take much time. Look at that and you will understand Dr. Jung's work. Paragraph 632. So I think we can go on now to the next question. What I have spoken of is, alas, to the great extent, the past. We cannot turn the wheel backwards. We cannot go back to the symbolism that is gone. No sooner do you know that this thing is symbolic than you say, oh, well, it presumably means something. Doubt has killed it, has devoured it. So you cannot go back. I cannot go back to the Catholic Church. I cannot experience the miracle of the Mass. I know too much about it. I know it is the truth, but it is the truth in a form in which I cannot accept it anymore. I cannot say, this is the sacrifice of Christ, and see him anymore. I cannot. It is no more true to me. It does not express my psychological condition. My psychological condition wants something else. I must have a situation in which that thing becomes true once more. I need a new form. When one has had the misfortune to be fired out of a church, or to say, quote, this is all nonsense, unquote, and to quit it, that has no merit at all. But to be in it and to be forced, say, by God to leave it, well, then you have legitimately extra ecclesiam. But extra ecclesiam nullo salus. You have God's decision without solace. Then things really become terrible because you have no more protected. You are no more in the consensus gentium, in the general consensus. You are no more in the lap of the all-compassionate mother. You are alone and you are confronted with all the demons of hell. That is what people don't know. They say they have an anxiety neurosis, nocturnal fears, compulsions. I don't know what. Your soul has become lonely. It is an extra ecclesiam and in a state of no salvation. And people don't know it. They think your condition is pathological, and every doctor helps them to believe it. And of course, when they say, and when everybody holds that this is neurotic and pathological, then we have to talk that language. I talk the language of my patients. When I talk with lunatics, I talk the lunatic language. Otherwise, they don't understand me. And when I talk with neurotics, I talk neurotic with them. But it is a neurotic talk when one says this is a neurosis. As a matter of fact, it is something quite different. It is the terrific fear of loneliness. It is the terrific fear of loneliness. It is the hallucination of loneliness and it is the loneliness that cannot be quenched by anything. You can be a member of a society with 1,000 members, and you are still alone. That thing in you, which should live alone, nobody touches, nobody knows it. You yourself don't know it, but it keeps on stirring. It disturbs you, it makes you restless, and it gives you no peace. So you see, I was forced simply through my patients to try to find out what we could do about such a condition. I am not going to found a religion. I know nothing about a future religion. I only know that in certain cases, such and such things develop. For instance, take any case you want. If I go far enough, if the case demands it, or if certain conditions are favorable, then I can observe certain unmistakable things, namely that the unconscious facts are coming up and becoming threateningly clear. That is very disagreeable, and therefore Freud had to invent a system to protect people and himself against the reality of the unconscious by putting a most deprecatory explanation upon these things, an explanation that always begins with nothing but. The explanation of every neurotic symptom was known long ago. We have a theory about it. It is all due to a father fixation or to a mother fixation, or it is all nonsense, so you can dismiss it. And so we dismiss our souls. Oh, I am bound by a fixation to my mother. And if I see that I have all kinds of impossible fancies about my mother, I am liberated from that fixation. If the patient succeeds, he has lost his soul. Every time you accept that explanation, you lose your soul. You have not helped your soul. You have replaced your soul by an explanation, a theory. I remember a very simple case. There was a student of philosophy, a very intelligent woman that was quite at the beginning of her career. I was a young doctor then, and I did not know anything beyond Freud. It was not a very important case of neurosis, and I was absolutely certain that he could be cured, that it could be cured, but the case had not been cured. That girl had developed a terrific father transference to me, projected the image of the father on me. I said, but you see, I'm not your father. I know, she said, that you're not my father, but it always seems as if you were. She behaved accordingly and fell in love with me. And I was her father, brother, son, lover, husband, and of course, also her hero and savior, every thinkable thing. But I said, you see, that is absolute nonsense. She says, but I can't live without it, she answered. What could I do with that? No depreciatory explanation would help her. She said, you can say what you like, it is so. She was in the grip of an unconscious image. Then I had the idea, quote, now, if anybody knows anything about it, it must be the unconscious. That has produced such an awkward situation, unquote. So I began to watch the dreams seriously, not just in order to catch certain fantasies, but because I really wanted to understand how her psychic system reacted in such an abnormal situation, or to such a very normal situation, if you like to say, because that situation is usual. She produced dreams in which I appeared as the father that we dealt with. Then I appeared as the lover, and I appeared as the husband. That was all in the same vein. Then I began to change my size. I was much bigger than the ordinary human being. Sometimes I had even divine attributes. I thought, oh, well, that is the old savior idea. And then I took on the most amazing forms. I appeared, for instance, the size of a god, standing in the fields holding her in my arms as if she were a baby. And the wind was blowing over the corn, and the fields were waving like waves of water. And in the same way, I rocked her in my arms. And then when I saw that picture, I thought, quote, now I see what the unconscious really is after. The unconscious wants to make a god of me. That girl needs a god. At least her unconscious needs a god. Her unconscious wants to find a god, and because it cannot find a god, it says, Dr. Jung is your god, unquote. And so I said to her what I thought, quote, I surely am not a god, but your unconscious needs a god. That is a serious and genuine need. No time before us has fulfilled that need. You are just an intellectual fool, just as much as I am, but we don't know it. That changed the situation completely. It made all the difference in the world. I cured that case because I fulfilled the need of the unconscious. Paragraph 635. 3 more pages. I can tell you another case. The patient was a Jewish girl. She was a funny little character, a very pretty, elegant little thing. And I thought, what a useless beast. She had a frightful neurosis, a terrible anxiety neurosis with awful attacks of fear. And she had suffered from these things for years. She had been with another analyst and had turned his head altogether. He fell in love with her, and she found no help in him. Then she came to me. The night before she came, before I had seen her at all, I had a dream. And I dreamed of a young girl, a pretty girl, that came to me, and I did not understand her case. Suddenly I thought, quote, by Jove, hasn't she an extraordinary father complex, unquote. And I felt it as a sort of revelation. I was much impressed by that dream. I did not know to what it referred. Then, when the girl came in the next day, instantly I thought of my dream. Perhaps she is the one, unquote. First, she told me her story. At first, I couldn't see what it was all about. And then I thought, quote, isn't it a father complex? I saw nothing of the father complex, but it gave me the idea of asking more about the history of her family. Then I found out that she came from a Hasidic family, you know, those great mystics. Her grandfather had been a sort of wonder rabbi. He had second sight, and her father had broken away from that mystic community, and she was completely skeptical and completely scientific in her outlook on life. She was highly intelligent, with that murderous kind of intellect that you very often find in Jews. So I thought, quote, aha, what does that mean with reference to her neurosis? Why does she suffer from such an abysmal fear, unquote? And I said to her, quote, look here, I'm going to tell you something, and you will probably think it is all foolishness, but you have been untrue to your God. Your grandfather led the right life, but you are worse than a heretic. You have forsaken the mystery of your race. You belong to holy people. And what do you live? No wonder that you fear God, that you suffer from the fear of God, unquote. Paragraph 636. Within 1 week, I had cured that anxiety neurosis, and that is no lie. I am too old to lie. That is a fact. Before she had many months of analysis, but all too rational. With the remark, she turned the corner as if she suddenly began to understand, and her whole neurosis collapsed. It had no point in it anymore. It had been based upon the mistake that she could live with her miserable intellect alone in a perfectly banal world, when in fact she was a child of God and should have lived the symbolic life where she would have fulfilled the secret will in herself that was also in her family. She had forgotten all that and was living, of course, in full contradiction to her whole natural system. Suddenly, her life had a meaning and she could live again. Her whole neurosis went by the board. Paragraph 637. In other cases, of course, it is not so. Should I say simple? It was not quite simple, you know. I do not want to tell you further details of that case. It was most instructive one, but I would rather tell you of other cases where things are not so simple, where you have to guide people quite slowly and wait for a long time until the unconscious produces the symbols that bring them back into the original symbolic life. Then you have to know a great deal about the language of the unconscious, the language of dreams. When you see how the dreams begin to produce extraordinary figures, these are all found in history under different names. They are unknown quantities, but you find these figures in a literature which is itself completely obsolete. If you happen to know these symbols, you can explain to your patients what the unconscious is after. Unquote. Paragraph 638. Of course, I can't give you a full description of these things. I can only mention them. From my observations, I learned that the modern unconscious has a tendency to produce a psychological condition, which we find, for instance, in medieval mysticism. You find certain things in Meister Eckhart. You find many things in Gnosticism. That is a sort of esoteric Christianity. You find the idea in Adam Kadmon, in every man, the Christ within. Christ is the second Adam, which is also in exotic religions, the idea of the Atman, or the complete man, the original man, the all-round man of Plato, symbolized by a circle or in a drawing with a circle motif. You find all these ideas in medieval mysticism. You find them all through alchemical literature, beginning with the 1st century after Christ. You find them in Gnosticism. You find many of them in the New Testament, of course, in Paul, but it is an absolute consistent development of the idea of Christ within, not the historical Christ without, but the Christ within. And the argument is that it is immoral to allow Christ to suffer for us, that he has suffered enough, and that we should carry our own sins for once and not shift them off onto Christ, that we should carry them all. Christ expresses the same idea when he says, I appear in the least of your brethren. And about it, my dear son, if the least of your brethren should be yourself, what about it then? Then you get the intimation that Christ is not to be the least in your life, that we have a brother in ourselves who is really the least of our brethren, much worse than the poor beggar whom you feed. That is, in ourselves, we have a shadow. We have a very bad fellow in ourselves, a very poor man, and he has to be accepted. What has Christ done? Let us be quite banal about it. What has Christ done when we consider him as an entirely human creature? Christ was disobedient to his mother. Christ was disobedient to his tradition. Christ falsified himself and played it out to the bitter end. He carried through his hypothesis to the bitter end. How was Christ born? In the greatest misery. Who was his father? He was an illegitimate child, humanly the most miserable situation. a poor girl having a little son. That is our symbol. That is ourselves. We are all that. And if anyone lives his own hypothesis to the bitter end and pays for it with his death, perhaps, he knows that Christ is his brother. That is modern psychology, and that is the future. That is the true future. That is the future of which I know. But of course, the historical future might be quite different. We do not know whether it is not the Catholic Church that will reap the harvest that is now going to be cut down. We do not know that. We do not know that. We do not know whether Hitler is going to found a new Islam. He is already on the way. He is like Muhammad. The emotion in Germany is Islamic, warlike and Islamic. They have all drunk with the wild God. That can be the historic future, but I do not care for a historic future at all, not at all. I am not concerned with it. I am only concerned with the fulfillment of that will which is in every individual. My history is only the history of those individuals who are going to fulfill their hypothesis. That is the whole problem. That is the problem of the true Pueblo, that I do today everything that is necessary so that my father can rise over the horizon. That is my standpoint. Now I think I have talked enough. Okay, so that's the end of that essay. There are now then about 13 or 10 pages of very interesting questions, but I will read those on another occasion. And if you've followed me this far in this reading, then you're going to be interested in those questions, that Q&A also. But I'll take a quick look at your pieces. It's now 5:43 in the morning, my time, and I've been up all night. So, Magic Sufi, what the hell is pastoral psychology? Psychology for cows. No, he's referring to pastors being shepherds or something like that. Metaphorically, of course. Not sure this was written in many, but many of the Catholic priests and nuns I knew have doctorates in a variety of fields. The Jesuits in particular have a very high emphasis on education. Yes, of course. Empty rituals recovering Catholic here, according to Magic Sufi. Ex-Catholic myself, but I found value in the rituals. The first of all, there is no original sin. It is a sin to even entertain or promote such a fallacy. Yep, I agree with that. The big cat, all rituals are empty in a sense. No, yes, they're irrational. They're not rational. So if you think they need to be make sense, then you have not understood the need that Dr. Jung is talking about. Magic Sufi. Confession is a shame-based idiocy. First communion is mind control. Papal infallibility is a lie. Okay, I agree with that. All of those. The big cat, yes, Papic. Infallibility is totally a lie. Papal, magic, any and all external savior myths are lies. Yes. The big cat, lots of shame-based programming, but that was not my experience at all. Communion is a great symbolic ritualism, in my opinion. And that was Dr. Jung's opinion too, as long as you live it. Magic Sufi, empty, and anti-Jungian. You may be anti-Jungian, Magic Sufi, but I'm sure that Dr. Jung would say, and I would say also, because we have Dr. Jerry Wright's book, which I'm currently reading, um, the mystical path less traveled, in which he's talking about the need to just leave the church entirely and just leave it behind, throw it all away. But if we don't have something to replace it appropriately, then how do we live our lives if they don't have meaning to us? And so I don't think it can all be thrown away, and it all needs to be understood, because in my view, every tradition is dealing with this red ball of chaos, and chaos is in the eros. There's no doubt about that, because there's nothing alive in the logos. And if you don't understand that, it's because you haven't read past John 1:1. If you read to John 1:4-5, then you see that even the Apostle John understood the need for life and light, for anything to happen. The logos is a structure, a skeleton upon which we live our lives. Even this video, I mean, right now, as I'm talking to you, I may be influencing you unconsciously. That's true. Okay, that's alive. That's definitely alive. But if I don't influence you unconsciously, then it's just words. Then it's just a video that you waste your time watching. And so, I mean, rituals can be empty if you don't understand them, if you don't appreciate what they're there for. And for me, when I was a deacon in the Calvinist Reformed Church, or Reformed Church of America, I would go to church every Sunday, and I couldn't figure out really why I was there. I was a lawyer, MBA, and I'm saying, what the heck am I sitting here for? But what I did notice was, and I'm quite intuitive and sensitive about such things, I noticed that when I came out of church, I felt better, and I couldn't explain it. I still can't explain it, but nonetheless, it's a fact. And so, for many people, maybe that's enough. Who knows? But for me, I haven't left the church. The church left me, and so I frequently go over to the Naval Academy Chapel when it's open after COVID or before COVID, and just sit in the church, because the church is my religion in a way, that church especially. But when the Protestant clergy come in, the chaplains, mostly they're all fundamentalists these days, and they're actually using the church to gain power and to gain money for their fundamentalist churches. And they're not interested in your immortal soul. There's no evidence of that. They're political leaders these days. And so I don't get anything from the chaplains over there. And so I don't go when they're in the church or in the Cathedral of the Navy, the chapel at the U.S. Naval Academy. A meaningful ritual is that which is sacred to the authentic individual. Okay, that's right. I don't know what you mean by empty ritual. Aren't all rituals empty? The individual pours his soul and his intentions into it. Yeah, that's quite right. In other words, you can find on my lecture, Finding the Living God, that I've had many numinous experiences in that church, and they never happen when the chaplains are there. but I put myself into my own ritual, and it becomes quite meaningful to me. Yeah. And the big cat says he doesn't believe in free will, and am hopelessly lost. Well, there's no free will. That's true. It is a truth that it is in a form that I cannot accept anymore. This is the fantastic insight by the author that describes my own psychological state. Hello. I know this man from audiobooks. Is this like a second channel? Well, this is my main channel, Futuro. I do have an audiobook called Political Psychology, New Ideas for Activists, which you might want to go listen to. But this is my primary YouTube channel, Carl Jung Psychology Reading Group. And I also have a couple of others which I've more or less abandoned. So this is the mainstream. And Futuro says, wow, I just checked. This is a lot of Jung content. Well, yes, there's more than 1,100 videos on this channel now. I've been working on it for 5 years, and I put untold hours into it. And of course, I was just reading a speech that Dr. Jung gave, so that was all Jung. And Sigma Rollo says, I love these talks, thank you. And the big cat says, this is a brilliant essay. Yes, it is. And Z says, we'd like to postmodern Marxist ideology influence with like the postmodern Marxist ideology influence on Western civilization and its educational systems. Well, I have no comment on that. I think you're trying to make a political point. You know, I'm neither a fan of nor do I believe Marx is very meaningful to us today. I know that the name of communism or Marxism or what have you is used for political purpose and trying to gain power and to fake you out for your vote. But you have to decide for yourself. You really do. And so I really urge you to go listen to the 2 hours that we did with Jorge Ferrer yesterday on his book, Participation in the Mystery. And he is a pluralist. He does not favor one religion over another. And he speaks of spiritual individuation. And I think that that makes a lot of sense to me. We each have to build our own religion. And actually, Dr. Thomas More, who's about to publish another book, but he wrote a book called A Religion of One's Own. And, you know, that's basically the idea that you have to, you know, and that's what I do when I'm underlining books by all these guys. I find the things that are meaningful to me. And now I've been doing it for decades. And so I know I have meaning to myself, and that's all that counts, you know. And I have found that what I'm doing has been helpful to me, and I'm trying to pass the idea along to you before I check out here. And Abraxas says all answers can be found within, precisely. Jordan Peterson has lots of material on postmodernist Marxism. It doesn't make any sense to me. Well, Jordan Peterson poured his life into understanding what went wrong in the totalitarian countries, both Russia and Germany, at opposite ends of the political spectrum, obviously. And he as a young man, found it really horrific. And so, you know, he's a heck of a smart man. He's a very smart man. And he found a lot of quotes that worked for him. And, but he's made the logos his God, his, you know, he stopped at John 1:1. And you know, God isn't in the logos, God is in the eros and in life. And in fact, we live our lives entirely in the eros. We do not live it in the logos. Everything in your room, just look around your room, everything that's there was built by logos. People had to put together plans, they had to write books, they had to paint pictures. Everything is logos. I mean, even you know, everything, even you are logos, because your body had to be built up. And so you were once a twinkle in your father's eye. But the fact is that there's no life in that. There's only life in life. And so from the time you were conceived until today, everything that you've lived has been in life. And when you were a twinkle in your father's eye, maybe you were logos for just a few minutes, but not too long. Sufi says, some minds are more capable than others, moving beyond the names and form of archetypes into the meaning behind them. Yes, of course, that's true. And Sufi says, therefore, the rituals of a fake society will be empty to such a man. Right. And, you know, we know what happens when we sell our souls to the devil. And so, you know, I used to be terribly proud of my country, but for the last 5 years, I've been having troubles being proud of it, but at least we have turned a corner, and I make no, I don't hide my political affiliation and my feelings politically, because I've been through enough of the mill that I know what's right and what's wrong. So that's me. And the big cat says it's so subjective. Yes, it's so subjective, but as Dr. Jung pointed out, we have people at every level of development for the last 2,000 or 10,000 years behind us, around us. Lots of people never have developed to the intellect that you gentlemen have had, or gentlemen and ladies have had. And so they haven't thought about these things. They don't understand them. They rely on their pastor or their teacher or their politician to tell them what's true. And what we need is a society that that lives in the mystery. And I say once again, please go back and take a look at Participation and the Mystery by Jorge Ferrer. And he talk with us about it on Wednesday. It's a very powerful video, and I urge you to watch that because he has summarized everything that I've been trying to get at for the last 34 years in 1 2-hour period. So I've given you a head of the class, skip the queue and go for the ice cream, as my daughter's psychology professor said, eat dessert first. So go to that dessert first, and then think about that, because there's a lot there. Thank you, Ms. Stella. I appreciate your comment. Okay, I've done my reading. I will do the reading of the Q&A to this essay, hopefully over the weekend if time permits. And Sufi says, for the last 40 years, tying my bootlaces has been a sacred ritual to me. Well, that's fair enough. You know, as long as you consider your body sacred, that's important. And, you know, as I have said a few times, you may not have heard it, when the financial crash happened in 2008, a neighbor of mine and I both lost our life savings. My neighbor had a very successful nursery business, and he went out in a little lake in front of his house in a boat and shot himself. I had lost my life savings, and you know, I had this little voice in my head, this little bad spirit voice in my head saying, well, why don't you just go shoot yourself? I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to see how this comes out. And I'm sure glad I didn't follow that advice, because I've had lots of very positive things that have happened since then, including the marriage of 2 of my daughters, and the birth of, I don't know, 7 or 8 of my 10 grandchildren. So, you know, that's where life is. That's what is important. So, those poor people have no access to rebuild or restore themselves, but are abused constantly. Well, I agree with you about that, Z, that, but at the same time, I disagree, because we are getting more and more knowledge of the archetypes, how they work, the fact that the movie industry caught on to it 50 years ago and started to capitalize on the archetypes. So we see those more and more directly in movies. The unfortunate thing is that they've made it appear to young people that the hero's journey is the only quest. And so they have these movies that have young men, typically, sometimes young women, do something courageous, and they get a big applause or a medal at the end, and everybody goes home. And the problem is that the hero's quest is the first half of life. It is learning how to be a human being in the first place, and fulfilling the activity of replenishing the species for the next generation. That's the first half of life, but most people are done that by 45 or 50, and then we have another 50 years to live. And so it came to me today, after hearing Jorge Ferrer, that the second half of life is really the spiritual quest. And if you don't have guidance, if you don't know how that spiritual quest has to be lived out, then you've got a lot of trouble. Now, I've put, as I say, over 1,100 videos on this YouTube channel, and everyone is pointing to that. But it was only in the early morning hours of this morning that I realized that a proper name for it is the spiritual quest. And so you heard it here first, my friends. Yes, Braxis says breathing is a sacred ritual. Absolutely, I can assure you of that. Having been under general anesthesia in the last 20 hours. So anyway, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I have not slept a friggin' wink all night. So I don't think I'm going to either, but I'll probably run out of steam at some point. I had a small procedure yesterday morning, and it's preparing me for the old man's solution to prostate cancer, which is radiation therapy in June and July. So I don't know how much I'm going to be doing in June or July, but you know, but we'll see. I just don't know, because as I said, I had this procedure yesterday, and here I am wound up and ready to go for the day. I'm not feeling like sleeping at all. I'm sure I will find a way out at some point. Yeah, so Big Cat, yes, Star Wars was explicitly based on the hero's quest as described by Jung and Campbell. Well, actually by Campbell, because Jung wasn't interested in people in the first half of life. He was interested in the spiritual quest, not the heroic quest. The hero's quest is getting young people to realize how heroically they have to get up every morning to go to kindergarten. And, if you don't think that's a heroic act, then go to some kindergarten on the first day of school, and you'll see how frightening that really is. And so just as someone said here, just getting up, putting your boots on in the morning is a heroic act. It's a sacred ritual. And but that's the hero's quest. And then if you get to 45 or 50 and you're not creating something, you're going to be in trouble. And by creating, I mean, you can do macrame, or you can do quilting, or you can do woodwork or something, but you better get something in your creative life, because we are all manifestations of God, and it's our duty to participate in the manifestation of God. That's what we're doing. Dennis says, I have often wondered if Hollywood has exploited archetypes, perhaps for various reasons through the years. Well, certainly they've overexploited the hero's journey, because it got to a time when the only thing that you can find are these dramas where there's some big battle that somebody conjures up and lots of big guns and so on. And they think that's life. That's not life. That's not the hero's quest. The hero's quest is becoming a functional human being. And so they think that being a shoot 'em up is about heroic. I did 23 years in the Marine Corps, and I can tell you that there's very little heroic about it, except you're proving yourself, your mettle, so that you are self-confident. But I can tell you, when I didn't have a flush toilet for 9 months. It wasn't fun. And it also wasn't fun when I didn't have a hot shower for 6 months. And every shower I took was a cold shower. And, if you think that's not bad in a country like Vietnam, you're wrong, because in the wintertime it can get down to 40 degrees in Vietnam. And I can tell you, taking a shower at 40 degrees is chilly. Yeah, I like the sacred shoe ritual too. Yeah, every pursuit to conquer is a hero's journey, but you have to set those pursuits out in front of yourself. And after you've raised your children and they're out of the nest, then you need something, and that needs to be something creative. So it can be anything. You can be baking cakes, and that also is a contribution. Yeah, you can't push the river, absolutely, but you can find a place of flow. Yes, that's true too. And Z says, my generation lacks discipline. Well, that's exactly right. We have had too many soccer moms who felt that every kid should have a trophy, and because they wanted them to feel good about themselves. But that's not the way you make people feel good about themselves. You make them feel good about themselves by achieving something. And if they're not cut out for soccer or football or what have you, then they should be trying something different. And yes, advertising uses archetypes and instinct by sex sells, right? Yep. And the big cat says, yep, Jungian, Freudian, and every psychology has been hijacked to make money. So, that's quite true. But for me, it has helped me keep my mental health, and I'm totally self-taught. Dr. Jung is my shrink and always has been. I acknowledge that, and others have more thoughts since Jung's life, and that's why I want you to go look at the Jorge Ferrer talk. But I don't seek to make money in my exercise here. So there's just no question that I spend more money doing this work than I take in. I do have a few people that are willing to pay me $10 a month on my Patreon channel, but that's very small sum. And Z, I'm not going to show your last comment. It's not worthy. Yep, find an honest mentor. And okay, folks, I have to go see what I'm going to do about the day here. So peace, and I hope this has been useful to you.